Welcome back to Fuqua Sports. Today I present to you the BCS Top 134 rankings, and we're going to use a similar model to how the BCS works. And I just think it's an interesting metric to see, because all these rankings that you see nowadays have a heavy recency bias, and that with these computers it values the entire season and team's performance throughout all the 4 or 5 months of the season rather than just the past month and how they've been trending. So first, I'm going to be brief with it. If you have any questions, just ask me in the comments below. But first, 1/3 of the BCS rankings come from the 6 computers. The computers are listed right there. So those computers rank teams 1 through 134, and I'm going to award points on a reverse basis. That's basically how the AP and coaches poll does it. And I'm going to take the 6-point values and remove the lowest and highest values of each team. And so that leaves the middle 4 points, which will add together for a score. And then I'll divide that score by 536 to arrive at our final value for part 1 for each team. And so here's an example. We'll use Boise State's the beloved Group 5 team. You can see all the rankings from the 6 computers and the points. They were rated highest by Wolf and the lowest by Sagarin, so those are thrown out. The remaining 4 are added for a total of 483 and divided by 536 for a total of 0.9011. So here's the second part of the BCS, is the human aspect. So they only use the USA Today's coaches poll because the AP opted out. But for this video, I'm going to incorporate the AP back in. Use the total number of points. Obviously you know how the scoring works. I'll divide each team's score by the maximum number of points possible, and then I'll average those two scores. So every team that receives the votes from the AP or coaches poll will receive a score, and I will use that score for the final rank for part 2. And for the teams that didn't receive any votes in either of the 2 rankings, that's where the USA Today's Top 134 comes in. I use that opinion piece as opposed to others, just because it's linked to the same program or whatever, USA Today. And then at that point, every team will have a point value or a rank from 1 through 134, and then I'll assign points in reverse order like I did in part 1, and then I'll divide by 134, like the maximum number of points, to get our final value of part 2. I know it's a little bit confusing. Again, you can comment any questions that you might have. Here are 3 examples. So for Boise State, you can see the number of points that they received in each poll, and then the resulting score. I'll average those scores. So for Boise State, it will be a 0.6712, and that final score ranked 9th compared to all the other teams. So divided by 134 with the 126 points that they got, they receive a final value of 0.9403 for part 2. So here's a second example where there's a little bit of overlapping between the AP coaches and the top 134 poll. Duke, Iowa, Marshall, and TCU. The latter 2 received the votes in the AP and coaches poll, meaning they got a score from those rankings. So despite being ranked lower than Duke and Iowa in the top 134, I'm going to say that the top 25 rankings take precedence, and that they'll be ranked higher and receive a higher final value than Duke and Iowa. So here's the third example where there's no overlapping. Sam Houston didn't receive any votes in either the AP nor the coaches polls. Therefore, their only way to get a ranking is through the USA Today's Top 134. There they ranked 50th, so they'll get 85 points divided by 134. They'll get a final value of 0.6343 for this part. And then for part 3, in the actual BCS was the Harris poll. However, that only also rated only the top 25. So to get a top 134 ranking, I had to look elsewhere. I actually used a website that gave a rating of the best performing computer throughout the entire season. So why not just use a proven computer, which for this season was the Doncic Inference Ratings, or D ratings. So they scored teams 1 through 134, and I'm just going to award points on a reverse basis like the other 2 sections. So for Boise State, they received a 3.4004 ranking from D ratings, which ranked 17th. Awarding points on a reverse basis, they get 118 points divided by 134. They get a final value of 0.8806 for part 3. And so a team's final values from all 3 parts are averaged, and so their final BCS score is a decimal between 0 and 1. And so we'll use Boise State's ranking as we have been for all 3 parts. You can see the scores that they got for each 3 parts, and then the final score is 0.9073, which ranked 12th compared to all the other teams, and you'll see that on this graphic. I know it's a long process, I know it can be kind of confusing, so again, ask questions if you need to, but then you can also look in that spreadsheet that I've linked in the graphic, and also in the description down below, so you don't have to type that URL in, and you can see every single team's score makeup and how they got to where they got. So without further ado, Let's get into the rankings, starting at 134 and then moving our way up to the top 10. Kent State is in the cellar, obviously not much of a surprise with an 0-12 finish. Just above them, Kennesaw State at 133. They're in their first year of the FBS, not as much success as Jacksonville State and Sam Houston, but obviously none of these teams in this graphic were very good. FAU with the best record on here, but obviously 4-8, not great of a season. Moving up, you have the worst Power 4 team, and that's Purdue. We thought they were somewhat competent with a 49-0 season opening win over Indiana State, but really just went all downhill after that. Then you have teams like Wyoming, UAB, San Diego State, who usually finish in the top half of the group of 5. They just struggled this season, but we'll see if they can right the ships in 2025. Moving up to the next set of teams, you have Mississippi State, the second worst Power 4 team, finishing 2-10. They were competitive at times, especially in the Egg Bowl and the season finale, but yeah, things just weren't going their way. Troy is also here. Troy was coming off 12-2 and 11-3 seasons, but they started off with an upset loss to Nevada. Then they had to go on the road to face Memphis and Iowa. Just hard for them to build up momentum. But you can see a bunch of Mountain West teams on this graphic. We move up, there's more Power 4 teams, Florida State being the most notable one. They started preseason number 10. That just shows how unreliable that the preseason rankings are. There's a lot of recency bias from 2023. They were just not a good team. I just don't know how you go from 13-0 to 2-10. Stanford, they had some surprising wins over a 10-win Syracuse team and a 9-win Louisville team. But other than that, they laid a bunch of duds, giving up 40 to Clemson, 49 to Notre Dame, 40 to SMU, and 59 to NC State. Then you have Oregon State. They lost their head coach and a bunch of players to the transfer portal. So despite finishing at 101 and a worse position than Washington State, they do seem a year ahead. Because for the Cougars, and we'll get to them in a second, Jake Dicker left for Wake Forest and a bunch of players went after them. So Washington State's pretty much suffering the same fate as Oregon State. We'll see how both of those two teams rebound as they suffer from the Pac-12 exodus. Speaking of Wake Forest, they just weren't a very good team. They had that one win on the road to NC State. It's hard to win in Carter Finley, but that's pretty much it. And then you have Oklahoma State. That was my Big 12 preseason pick. Mike Gundy has a track record of being so consistent. I just don't know what happened to them. And then Liberty, also at 95th, finished 8-4, but 2 straight losses to end the season. I feel like 95 is a harsh finish for Liberty, but that strength of schedule was really not that good. So we move up, and now you can see the accolades on the right side of the screen. Arkansas State wins the 68 Ventures Bowl. You have some more Power 4 teams. Western Kentucky was a Conference USA runner-up. And then you have Arizona. They suffered the same fate as Oklahoma State. We'll get into the narrative later, but the Big 12 was just impossible to predict. You just can't tell me that preseason last place pick Arizona State went on to win the conference, and then 4 of the top 5 teams in that preseason poll, Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Utah, all failed to make a bowl game. That's just crazy. But anyways, we move up to the next set of teams. NIU finishes at 82nd. They had that one win over Notre Dame, one of 2 teams to beat them, obviously the other being Ohio State in the national championship game. But after that upset win over Notre Dame that shocked the college football world, they got upset by Buffalo, and that was pretty much the end of their season. They just finished 8-5. Not a bad season, but for what could have been after that win over Notre Dame, just sort of a disappointing ending. Other than that, we have Jacksonville State, the Conference USA champion, and then USF finishing above their in-state rivals UCF. USF and San Jose State set the record for the most overtimes in their Hawaii Bowl, but that record only lasted for less than 48 hours, in fact, because Toledo just broke that record again in their win in the Game Above Sports Bowl against Pitt. Elsewhere in this graphic, you have Buffalo, who beat NIU, derailing their season. They finished the season strong, 4th place in the MAC with a 9-4 record. And then you have Sam Houston State. They were actually the highest ranked Conference USA, but you'll see this with other teams like Ohio State and BYU. It's just the tiebreakers didn't work in their favor. They couldn't play in the conference championship game. But a 10-win season after what, like a 2 or 3, I think they went 3-9 in 2023. What a great turnaround. You have Utah at 5-7, failing to make a bowl game. I mentioned them already. And then East Carolina and NC State, they had a rather scrappy finish in the Military Bowl. East Carolina was victors of that, but they're gonna open the season in 2025 in Raleigh. So no love lost between the in-state rivals. Let's move up, and now these 64 teams all have ratings above 0.5, so they beat the average for 2024. You have Washington State finishing at 60. They were 8-1, ranked what, like 17th I think in the playoff rankings, so they could have made the college football playoff, but 4 straight losses really derailed their season. And then I talked about Dickert's exit to Wake Forest and the roster exodus. They just feel like what Oregon State had to deal with this season. We'll see what they do for 2025. And then you have Wisconsin. They had 23 consecutive winning seasons. That record was broken. I mean, records are meant to be broken, but Wisconsin's always been an admirable, consistent 8-9 win team. It just sucks that they had to go out this way. We'll see if they can rebound, but that schedule for 2025 is not going to do them any favors. Auburn went 1-5 in games decided in 10 points or under. They did have that signature win late in the season against Texas A&M, dramatic in 4 overtimes. That's pretty much it. Pittsburgh started 7-0, but they just completely broke down, lost their last 6. Moving up, not many accolades in this graphic, however, these teams were splashy at times during the season. Kansas where they go also 1-5 in 1-possession games at the 2-minute warning. They just can't finish games. However, they are the first team in college football history to be unranked and beat 3 ranked teams in consecutive weeks. Then you have Oklahoma. It really feels like that they're on the decline. It kind of feels like that they might be the Nebraska of the SEC. We'll see if they can turn things around, but the SEC is going to be so competitive next year, and I don't think Oklahoma can hold up. And then at 46, Georgia Tech, they beat Florida State, ranked 10 at the time. They also beat 4th ranked Miami and took in-state rival Georgia to the limit. 8 overtimes, it was a dramatic game, so they definitely built a name for themselves in big games this past season. They did away a couple duds, scoring only 6 against Virginia Tech and then losing their bowl game to Vanderbilt. But still a good season for the Yellow Jackets. Speaking of Vanderbilt, no one expected them to go to a bowl game, if not have a winning season, but they did just that. Amazing season for Vanderbilt. Same with Arkansas. Some of these teams are forgotten in the SEC, but had strong winning seasons. Then you have Ohio and Marshall, first place in the MAC and Sun Belt conferences respectively. My heart just breaks for Marshall. Even though they won their conference, they could not play in a bowl game because 34 players opted out of their program for the transfer portal. Like, the NCAA really needs to rethink their transfer portal window so that this thing that happened to Marshall does not happen again, because this is just truly insane. You also have Nebraska, first winning season since 2016. And then Tulane, they were the AAC runner-up, although a rather disappointing season for their standards after 2 consecutive double-digit season wins before then. Moving up, you have a pair of Big 12 surprise teams in Baylor and TCU. TCU went to the national championship game 2 years ago, then failed to go bowling, so it's nice to see them back at 9-4. Sonny Dykes feels like he has his program in an upward trajectory. Then you have Syracuse. They kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't think they'd be very good. They had them going 2-6 in the ACC, but 6-6 overall. They capitalized on an easy non-conference schedule, went 10-3, good season for them. Then you have UNLV. I feel like they were shadowed by Boise State and Ashton Genty, but credit to their turnaround. They went winless just a couple of seasons ago. In 2023, they had their first winning season in 10 years, and then 2024, they backed that up with an 11-win season. The sky's the limit, it feels like, for this team. They're really going to try to push for a playoff spot in 2025. Iowa is Iowa. They always figure out how to win 8-9 games every single season. Then you have Army, winner of the AAC. But same thing with Navy. They both had 1 loss coming into their games against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame destroyed both of them, and it really destroyed the momentum of their season. But let's go into the top 25. Just outside of it though, Florida finishing 8-5. Impressive season on their part. I didn't think they'd make it to a bowl. They had undeniably the hardest schedule in all of 2024. So getting 8 wins out of that is nothing to hang their heads over. Then you have 25 Kansas State over 26 Colorado. Colorado had all that media hype, but Kansas State had that head-to-head win record, and they had a bowl game victory. And Kansas State, you have to give props to them, even though season kind of felt like a disappointment, especially losing 3 out of their last 4. They are the only team out of the top 5 preseason favorites to actually make a bowl game, so you have to give them credit there. 22 is Missouri. They kind of felt like the team that's like, how are you still ranked? Some of their wins looked very uninspiring, but they got the job done, and you have to give them credit because they finished tied for the fewest amount of losses in the SEC. Just above them, LSU at 21. They were ranked 8th mid-October, but 3 straight losses really derailed their season. But they do have a win over the surging Baylor Bears in the Texas Bowl. They have a strong transfer portal class, and they expect to make the playoffs in 2025. Tons of hype around that program. We'll see if they can build on it. And into the top 20 is Michigan. They have 2 of the strongest wins for the entire season in consecutive games, beating Ohio State and Alabama. They didn't start too well, but they finished very well and look to use that momentum heading into 2025. And then in Illinois, quiet 10-win season under Brett Bielema. I feel like they were overshadowed by Indiana, but nonetheless, they did beat South Carolina in the Citrus Bowl, a team who was surging towards the end of the season and gaining the attention of many people. They won 6 straight at the end of the season, including wins over Clemson and Missouri. Clemson was the ACC champion, Arizona State was a Big 12 champion, but Miami and BYU finished ranked the highest out of those respective conferences. Lots of parity amongst those conferences. And then for SMU, they won the AAC in 2023. Didn't know how they fit in the ACC for this season, but they did very well. They were 11-1, so despite losses to Clemson and Penn State to finish the season, nothing to hang their heads about. And then Boise State, obviously with Ashley and Genty, probably should have won the Heisman. People were really arguing about that after Colorado's performance in their loss to BYU in the Alamo Bowl. But Genty did struggle against Penn State, a big reason why the Broncos were 1-done in the playoffs. Nonetheless, 12-win season and a lot of media attention. Good season for the Broncos. And then for Alabama, 9-4 under Kevin DeBoer. It is his first season trying to get adjusted to Alabama's playbook and system. Again, remember the Crimson Tide went 2007 with a loss to ULM under Saban in its early years. So I feel like Alabama will be fine under Kevin DeBoer. As we move into the top 9, and the first thing you notice is the conference disparity between the Big 10 SEC versus the Big 12 ACC and the Group of 5 conferences. It's literally 4 Big 10 teams, 4 SEC teams, and the one other team is an independent. It's not even a team from the ACC or the Big 12. And I feel like the power shift is going to lean more towards what this looks like in the coming years with the NIL and the transfer portal and the media rights. It's just that these two conferences have more resources, and it's really just going to be exemplified. But with that being said, Georgia and Oregon won those two conferences. However, it was Texas and Ohio State who outlasted them in the playoffs. Notre Dame, after their loss to NIU, I thought they were down for the count, but they responded well, making it to the College Football Championship. Oregon, I feel like their image was damaged a lot in the Rose Bowl. However, they finished the season with the best winning percentage in all of college football. They rebounded well after a sluggish start to Idaho and Boise State, which that 37-34 win against Boise State actually lived up to be a pretty good game though, because the Broncos finished very well. At 7th, you have Indiana, projected to go 17th in the preseason Big 10 poll. So big turnaround for Curt Cignetti, no one saw it coming. And then Ole Miss at 10-3. Playoffs aside, the SEC was pretty underwhelming in bowl season. I think they had a losing record. But Ole Miss, with their blowout win over Duke, they were the shining piece for the SEC. And that was good enough to rocket the Rebels into 8th place ahead of all these teams who lost in the playoffs. But obviously you have Ohio State at number 1. Weapons on both sides of the ball. The Cotton Bowl, the Rose Bowl win, national championship win. Only thing missing was a conference title win, which they didn't even get to play in because of tiebreakers. But very successful season for Ohio State. First national championship wins since 2014. I think his first back-to-back titles for the Big Ten since the 1930s in Minnesota. But that's going to be it for this video. And it's nice to see this BCS metric, which considers the entire season as a whole. And again, I said this before, but I feel like there's a lot of recency bias with these AP and Coaches Poll rankings. So just being able to see what these teams have done throughout the entire season, these entire 4 or 5 months. But with that being said, if you have any questions about this formula, just ask in the comments. I will also link the spreadsheet so you can see how every single team got their scores. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss any new content, and have a good one.